Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a series of videos in which I'm reading you a book. We are reading Can You Forgive Her? By Anthony Trollope, one of the many novels he wrote that ends in a question mark. And we are up to chapter 4. In the last chapter, the previous one, we met John Gray, that worthy gentleman. And several times, several people so far have contrasted John Gray, that worthy gentleman, with George Vavasor, the wild man. Both of these men have been at one point or another romantically affianced to Alice Vavasor, who we are to forgive in the course of this book. Now we're going to meet him. Now we have the chapter is George Vavasor, the wild man. And if the previous chapter was called John Gray, the worthy man, if that was Trollope being a little tongue-in-cheek, this is probably a little tongue-in-cheek too. Or is it? We will have all that. We've already met George Vavasor at a dinner party dissipation at Queen Anne Street. But now we will get the full amount of information that we need to determine for ourselves whether or not he is a wild man. So this is chapter 4. It will no doubt be understood that George Vavasor did not roam about the woods unshorn or wear leather trappings and sandals like Robinson Crusoe instead of coats and trousers. His wildness was of another kind. Indeed, I don't know that he was, in truth, at all wild, though Lady Macleod had called him so, and Alice had assented to her use of the word. George Vavasor had lived in London since he was 20, and now, at the time of the beginning of my story, he was a year or two over 30. He was and ever had been the heir to his grandfather's estate, but that estate was small, and when George first came to London, his father was a strong man of 40, with as much promise of life in him as his son had. It's a nice estate, though. It's a nice thing. If you weren't ambitious, being the lock-solid heir to an unencumbered estate in the country, a nice estate in the country, it's a life that a lot of people could make very pleasant for themselves and everyone who knows them. Where was I before I stopped? Oh, right, here we go. A profession had therefore been absolutely necessary to him. Yeah, he's not going to inherit for a long time. It's not like some of the larger estates that we've seen where just being the heir means that he has enough of the proceeds of the place so he doesn't have to work. He definitely needs to work. And he had, at his Uncle John's insistence, been placed in the office of a parliamentary land agent. With this parliamentary land agent he had quarreled to the knife, but not before he had by his talents made himself so useful that he had before him the prospects of a very lucrative partnership in the business. George Vavasor had many faults, but idleness, absolute idleness, was not one of them. No doubt a reference to Lady Macleod's comment that she got the impression they didn't ever do anything. He would occasionally postpone his work to pleasure. He would be at Newmarket when he should have been at Whitehall. But it was not usual with him to be in bed when he should be at his desk, and when he was at his desk he did not whittle his ruler or pick his teeth or clip his nails. Upon the whole, his friends were pleased with the first 5 years of his life in London, in spite of his having been found to be in debt on more than one occasion. But his debts had been paid, presumably by his grandfather, and all was going on swimmingly when one day he knocked down the parliamentary agent with a blow between the eyes, and then there was an end of that. He himself was wont to say that he had known very well what he was about, and that it had behooved him to knock the man down who was to have been his partner, and that he regretted nothing in the matter. At any rate, the deed was looked upon with approving eyes by many good men of standing, or at any rate sufficient standing to help George to another position. And within 6 weeks of the time of his leaving the office at Whitehall, he had become a partner in an established firm of wine merchants. A great aunt had just then left him a couple of £1,000, which no doubt assisted him in his views with the wine merchants. In this employment he remained for another period of 5 years, and was supposed by all his friends to be doing very well. And indeed he did not do badly, only that he did not do well enough to satisfy himself. He was ambitious of making the house to which he belonged the first house in the trade in London, and scared his partners by the boldness and extent of his views. He himself declared that if they would only leave the going along with him, he would make them princes in the wine market. But they were men either of more prudence or of less audacity than he, and they declined to walk in his courses. At the end of the 5 years, Vavasor left the house, not having knocked anyone down on this occasion, and taking with him a very nice sum of money. The last 2 of these 5 years had certainly been the best period of his life, for he had really worked very hard like a man, giving up all the pleasures that took time from him, and giving up almost all the pleasures which were dangerous on account of their costliness. He went to no races, played no billiards, spoke of Cremorne as a childish thing. Think of it as Disneyland, expensive and pointless. which he had abandoned now that he is no longer a child. It was during these 2 years that he had his love passages with his cousin. His first cousin, Alice Vavasor. And it must be presumed that he had, at any rate, intended at one time to settle himself respectably as a married man. He had, however, behaved very badly to Alice, and the match had been broken off. We can make a small parenthetical insertion here. I'm sure you don't need me to do it yourself. That when Trollope says work as a man, he is just indulging in the normal, complacent background sexism of the Victorian era. The woman who ran Trollope's household when he was a successful novelist and had charge of the cook and had charge of the children and had charge of the room cleaning and made sure that everything was clean and made sure that there was fresh food and that the grocer and the greengrocer and the butcher were paid, worked a lot harder than any man in London. So, but you know that already. He had also, during the last 2 years, quarreled with his grandfather. Okay, let's start keeping score. He doesn't exactly quarrel with the other wine merchants, but he not only quarrels with the land agent, he knocks him down. And now he's quarreling with his grandfather. He had wished to raise a sum of money on the Vavasor estate, which, as it was unentailed, he could only do with his grandfather's concurrence. The old gentleman would not hear of it, would listen with no patience to the proposition. It was in vain that George attempted to make the squire understand that the wine business was going on very well, that he himself owed no man anything, that everything with him was flourishing, but that his trade might be extended indefinitely by the use of a few £1,000s at moderate interest. Old Mr. Vavasor was furious. No documents and no assurance could make him lay aside the belief that the wine merchants and the business of his grandson were all ruined and ruinous together. No one but a ruined man would attempt to raise money on the family estate. So they had quarreled, and had never spoken to each other since. "He shall have the estate for his life," the squire said to his son John. "I don't think I have a right to leave it away from him. It has never been left away from the heir, but I'll tie it up so that he shan't cut a tree on it." John Vavasor perhaps thought that the old rule of primogeniture might be, in such circumstances, have been judiciously abandoned, in this one instance, in his own favour. But he did not say so, nor would he have said it had it been there a chance of his doing so with success. He was a man from whom no very noble deed could be expected, but he was also one who would do no ignoble deed. After that, George Vavasor had become a stockbroker. And we'll get to John Vavasor. We're going to get to all of these people. And I know it's not seeming so, because we're bouncing back and forth between the same four people, but trust me, cast is going to expand enormously in this book, obviously, since it's huge. And you're going to be so pleased with the expansions. So pleased. After that, George Vavasor had become a stockbroker, and a stockbroker he was now. In the first 12 months after his leaving the wine business, the same being the first year after his breach with Alice, he had gone back greatly in the estimation of men. He had lived in open defiance of decency. He had spent much money and had apparently made none, and had been, as all his friends declared, on the high road to ruin. It's odd. We're told about the estimation of his friends when he's doing well. We're told about the estimation of his friends when he knocks down the land agent. We're now told the estimation of his friends when he's living in defiance of all decency. We're not told what that is. Does he keep a woman in his chambers? Does he spit on the policeman? We're not told what that is. But we never meet these friends. He seems entirely alone. But anyway. Aunt MacLeod had taken her judgment from this period in his life when she had spoken to him as a man who never did anything. But he had come forth again suddenly as a working man, and by now those who professed to know declared that he was by no means poor. He was in the city every day, and during the last 2 years had earned the character of a shrewd fellow who knew what he was about, who might not perhaps be very mealy-mouthed in affairs of business, but who was fairly and decently honourable in his money transactions. In fact, he stood well in the exchange. And during these 2 years he had stood a contest for a seat in Parliament, having striven to represent the metropolitan borough of Chelsea, on an extremely radical interest. It is true that he had failed, and that he had spent a considerable sum of money in the contest. "Where on earth does your nephew get his money?" men said to John Vavasor at his club. "Upon my word, I don't know," said Vavasor. "He doesn't get it from me, and I'm sure he doesn't get it from my father." But George Vavasor, though he had failed at Chelsea, did not spend his money altogether fruitlessly. He gained reputation by the struggle, and men came to speak of him as though he were one who would do something. He was a stockbroker, a thoroughgoing radical, and yet he was the heir to a fine estate, which had come down from father to son for 400 years. There was something captivating about his history and adventures, especially as just at that time the election he became engaged to an heiress who died a month before the marriage should have taken place. She died without a will, and her money went to third cousins. So we never meet this one. We never meet this heiress. We'll hear a little bit more about her, but we never meet her. George Vavasor bore this last disappointment like a man, and it was at this time that he again became fully reconciled to his cousin. Previous to this, they had met, and Alice had, at her cousin Kate's instigation, had induced her father to meet him. But at first there was no renewal of real friendship. Alice had given her cordial assent to her cousin's marriage with the heiress, Miss Grant, telling Kate that such an engagement was the very thing to put him thoroughly on his feet. And then she had been much pleased by his spirit at the Chelsea election. "It was grand of him, wasn't it?" said Kate, her eyes brimming full of tears. "It was very spirited," said Alice. "If you knew all, you wouldn't say so, but they could get no one else to stand by Mr. Travers, and he wouldn't come forward unless they would guarantee all his expenses." "I hope it didn't cost George much," said Alice. "It did, though nearly all he got. But what matters? Money is nothing to him except for its uses. My own little mite is my own now, and he shall have every farthing of it in the next election, even though I should go out as a housemaid the next day." Again, Kate is excessively attached to her brother. There must have been something great about George Vavasor, or he would not have been so idolized by such a girl as his sister Kate. Early in the present spring, before the arrangements for the Swiss journey were made, George Vavasor had spoken to Alice about the intended marriage, which had been broken off by the lady's death. He was sitting one evening with his cousin in the drawing room in Queen Anne Street, waiting for Kate, who was to join him there before going to some party. So in the green room. I wonder whether Kate had a hint from her brother as to be late, so they could talk in private without her. At any rate, the two were together for an hour, and the talk had been all about himself. He had congratulated her on her engagement with Mr. Grey, which had just become known to him, and had spoken of his own last intended marriage. "I grieved for her," he said, "greatly." "I'm sure you did, George." "Yes, I did. For her, herself. Of course, the world has given me credit for lamenting the loss of her money, but the truth is that as regards both herself and her money, it is much better for me that we were never married." "Do you mean even though she should have lived?" "Yes, even though she had lived." "And why so? If you liked her, her money was surely no drawback." "No, not if I had liked her." "Then did you not like her?" "No." "Oh, George." "I did not love her as a man should love his wife, if you mean that. As for my liking her, I did like her. I liked her very much." "But you would have loved her." "I don't know. I don't find the task of loving so very easy. It might have been that I should have learned to hate her." "If so, it is better for you and better for her that she has gone." "It is better. I am sure of it. Tony, it's not better for her that she's dead." "Okay, she could find somebody else." "I am sure of it. And yet I grieve for her, and in thinking of her I almost feel as though I were guilty of her death." "Are we 100% sure you aren't?" But she never suspected that you did not love her?" "Oh, no. She was not at all given to think such things. She took all for granted. Poor girl. She's at rest now, and her money has gone where it should go, among her own relatives." "Yes, with such feeling as yours are about her, her money would have been a burden to you." "I would not have taken it." "I hope, at least, that I would not have taken it. Money is a sore temptation, especially to a poor man like me. It is well for me that the trial did not come in my way." "But you're not such a very poor man now, are you, George? I thought your business was a good one." "It is, and I have no right to be a poor man, but a man will be poor who does such mad things as I do. I had £3,000 or £4,000 clear, and spent every shilling of it on the Chelsea election. Goodness knows whether I shall have a shilling at all when another election comes around. If I have, I shall certainly spend it, and if I have not, I shall go in debt whenever I can raise £100. So he intends to run again. Intends to stand for election again. He thinks he belongs in Parliament. "I hope you will succeed at last," said Alice. "I feel sure that I shall. But in the meantime, I cannot but know that my career is perfectly reckless. No woman ought to join her lot to mine unless she has within her the courage to be as reckless as I am. You know what men do when they toss up for shillings." "Yes, I suppose I do." "I am tossing up every day of my life for every shilling that I have." "Do you mean that you're gambling?" "No, I have given that up altogether. I used to gamble, but I never do that now, and I never shall again. What I mean is that I hold myself in readiness to risk everything at every moment in order to gain any object that may serve my turn. I am always ready to lead a forlorn hope. That's what I mean by tossing up everything, every shilling I have every day." Alice did not quite understand him, and perhaps he did not intend that she should. Perhaps his object was to mystify her imagination. She did not understand him, but I fear that she admired the kind of courage which he possessed. And he had not only professed it, but in matter of the past election he had certainly practiced it. Is she comparing him to someone? Maybe. In talking of beauty to his sister, he had spoken of himself as being ugly. He would not generally have been called ugly by women had not one side of his face been dreadfully scarred by a cicatrice, which in healing had left a dark, indented line drawn down from his left eye to his lower jaw. That black ravine running through his cheek. That black ravine running through his cheek was certainly ugly. On some occasions, when he was angry or disappointed, it was very hideous, for he would so contort his face that the scar would, as it were, stretch itself out, revealing all its horrors, and his countenance would become all scar. "He looked at me like the devil himself, making the hole in his face gape at me," the old squire had said to John Vavasor, in describing the interview in which the grandson had tried to bully his grandfather into assenting to his own views on the mortgage. But in other respects, George's face was not ugly. Apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, what did you think of the play? But in other respects, George's face was not ugly, and might have been thought handsome by many women. His hair was black and was parted in front. His forehead, though low, was broad. His eyes were dark and bright, and his eyebrows were very full and perfectly black. At those periods of his anger, all his face which was not scar was eye and eyebrow. He wore a thick black mustache which covered his mouth, but had no whiskers. People said of him that he was so proud of his wound that he would not grow hair to cover it. The fact, however, was that no whisker could be made to come sufficiently forward to be of service, and therefore he wore none. So he is like Ahab. He can't get any hair to cover his scar. The story of that wound should be told. When he was yet hardly more than a boy, before he had come up to London, he was living in a house in the country which his father then occupied. At the time his father was absent, and he and his sister alone were in the house with the maidservants. His sister had a few jewels in her room, and an exaggerated report of them had come to the ears of certain enterprising burglars. And a little plan was arranged for obtaining them. A small boy was hidden in the house, a window was opened, and at the proper watching hour of night a stout individual crept upstairs in his stocking feet, and was already at Kate Vavasor's door, when, in the dark, dressed only in his nightshirt, wholly unarmed, George Vavasor flew at the fellow's throat. 2 hours elapsed before the horror-stricken women of the house could bring men to the place. George's face had then been ripped open from the eye downwards with some chisel or house-breaking instrument. But the man was dead. George had wrenched from him his own tool, and having first jabbed him all over with insufficient wounds, had at last driven the steel through his windpipe. The small boy escaped, carrying with him 2 shillings and 3 pence which Kate had left upon the drawing-room mantelpiece. So this George, who's little more than a boy himself, kills a man by ramming a stake through his throat, and then sits with the dead body for 2 hours. George Vavasor was rather low in stature. Tony's just going to go on. He's just going to tell you that and go on. George Vavasor was rather low in stature, but well made, with small hands and feet, but broad in chest and strong in loins. He was a fine horseman and a hard rider, and men who had known him well said that he could fence and shoot with a pistol as few men cared to do in these peaceable days. Since volunteering had come up, he had become a captain of volunteers and had won prizes with his rifle at Wimbledon. Such had been the life of George Vavasor, and such was his character, and such his appearance. He had always lived alone in London, and did so at present, but just now his sister was much with him, as she was staying up in town with an aunt, another Vavasor by birth, but with whom the reader will, if he persevere, become acquainted in course of time. I hope he will persevere a little, for all the Vavasors, Mrs. Greenow was perhaps the best worth knowing. We're going to get to know Mrs. Greenow. But Kate Vavasor's home was understood to be her grandfather's house in Westmoreland. On the evening before they started for Switzerland, George and Kate walked from Queen Anne Street, where they had been dining, with Alice to Mrs. Greenow's house. Everything had been settled about the luggage, the hours of starting, and the routes as regarded their first few days, and the common purse had been made over to George. That portion of Mr. Gray's letter had been read, which alluded to the Paynhams and the glasses of water, and everything had passed in the best good humor. I'll endeavor to get the cold water for you, George had said, but as to breakfast, I can only hope you won't put me to severe trials by any early hours. When people go out for pleasure, it should be pleasure. The brother and sister walked through the 2 or 3 streets in silence, and then Kate asked a question. George, I wonder what your wishes really are about Alice. That she shouldn't want her breakfast too early while we are away. That means I'm to hold my tongue, of course. No, it doesn't. Then it means you intend to hold yours. Not that either. Then what does it mean? That I have no fixed wishes on the subject. Of course she'll marry this John Gray, and then no one will hear about her, because she'll be buried in the country, never come to London. She will, no doubt, if you don't interfere. Probably she will whether you interfere or not. But if you wish to interfere, she's got 400 a year, and is not so good-looking as she was, says George Vavasor, the wild man. Yes, she has got 400 a year, and she is more handsome now than she ever was. I know you think so, and that you love her now and love no one else, unless you have a sneaking fondness for me. This is his sister we're talking about. This isn't even first cousins. I'll leave you to judge of that. As for me, I love only 2 people in the world, her and you. If you mean to try, you should try now. If you mean to try, you should try now. So Kate is still hoping that he will marry Alice Vavasor. Okay, all right. Well, he doesn't seem to have any thought of it, but that is the chapter that gives us George Vavasor, the wild man. And Trollope is very careful. He is a very careful writer. He wrote so fast and he wrote so much that it was easy in his own day, and it's been easy ever since for a lot of his critics to characterize him as a writer who's not careful. But he was very careful. And when he opens the chapter by saying, well, character X, people call him wild, but I'm not sure that he's wild at all. And then gives us a chapter like we just read. Well, okay, he doesn't wear, skins and furs in the jungle. But George Vavasor is not a nice man. He's not a good man. I think we can come to that conclusion from this chapter regardless of anything else. But anyway, we will... and he's also got the mark of Cain on him. Let's not beat around the bush about it. He's got the mark of Cain on him. And the more Trollope you read, the more you're going to know that is never inconsequential. Never. Never. Physical details mean a lot with this author. He might want them not to, but they do. So now we know George Vavasor. Now we know our original cast quite well. We haven't had a full disquisition on Kate, but she's coming. But anyway, that's this chapter for now. So I will wrap this up for now, and we'll move on next time. Thank you, BookTube.